Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. For tonight's program, Next, Water Crisis. And now your host for this evening, co-producer of SCPR's science series, Next, People, Science, Tomorrow, Matt Kaplan.
Thank you, and welcome to another Next, People, Science, Tomorrow. Artificial intelligence, 3D bioprinters, traveling to the stars. Now, most of our programs have been starry-eyed with optimism about the future of humanity. We'll see if we can come anywhere near that tone this evening. Is there anything that we can say about the drought in Southern California and across the western U.S. that hasn't already been said? It's in the news every day. There's been, I think, particularly good coverage coming from the LA Times. We'll see if the panelists agree with that. Also, from right here at KPCC, and I've got some pictures of some of the stuff that's been happening at scpr.org. The work of Jed Kim, Molly Peterson, and Sandin Totten. They're with the Environment and Science desks here at the station. Really ought to be winning the station another, shelf full of those awards that some of you saw in the lobby outside there. We've also heard with varying degrees of helpfulness from every level of government, including our legislature, NASA, the U.S. Congress, and the President of the United States, who recently spoke from a California farm about how his administration is working the problem with Governor Brown. This very day, about 500 people rallied in Fresno outside a water crisis hearing by the House Natural Resources Committee. So it is certainly a political issue, as well as one of very pretty close to life and death for a lot of communities in Southern California and the entire state and beyond. So this is Next. So what we will try to do is, at least for part of the time this evening, look to the future, and we'll do so in extended conversations with three really outstanding guests: a scientist, a policy expert, and a water professional, all of whom are at the top of their fields. You're going to see a lot of scary graphics in the next few minutes. I think I'm going to start you out with one of those right now. This is one that I actually pulled from something that Sandin Totten, our science reporter, put on the website. So there is the rainfall across Southern California, that tangle of lines. Each one of those lines is a year looking back more than 100 years across the history of California. And if you look at the bottommost line there, that purple one, sort of purple one there, that's this year. That ought to put the fear of what? Precipitation in you. And that's just to get us started. So on that opening note, let me tell you about Dr. Glenn M. McDonald. Glenn is a UCLA Distinguished Professor in the Department of Geography and the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. He's also a UC Presidential Chair. Glenn directs the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. You're going to be hearing that name several times this evening. If you throw a dart anywhere in Glenn's bio, you're going to hit some top-level honor or accomplishment. He has published more than 140 papers in many of the world's most distinguished journals. Much of his work has been on water resources in the western U.S. and other semi-arid regions around the world. He's known for his work on the concept of the perfect drought, and you can bet that's something that I will ask him about this evening. He's a past chair of the Geology and Geography section of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. You may very well have caught him on C-SPAN testifying before the U.S. Senate or writing opinion pieces for the LA Times. I kind of like the keywords that are listed at the bottom of his institute biography on the UCLA website: biodiversity, climate, environment, and water. Please help me welcome Glenn McDonald. Right here, Glenn. And for those of you who haven't seen this before, we let Johnny Carson set the pattern for this. We'll bring up the guests one at a time after getting to talk to them for a little bit. Thank you for coming up here first, Glenn.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you folks for coming out and hear this. I hope this isn't going to be like an economics lecture, the dismal science, but there are some realities we have to face.
Yeah, and there is some stuff that we're going to want to get through here in the slides that you brought along. But before we do that, if you could just sort of set this up and tell us, are we beginning to see more than just a regular drought cycle? Are we beginning to see something that indicates long-term trends? And hold that microphone right up below your chin.
Right.
There you go.
I think that's a great way to start things. My own research is on long-term climatic trends, and I like to put the drought into two types of context. One is looking at it longer than the annual. What is the context? Is this part of a longer-term pattern? And then I like to look at the geographic context. What is the geography of this drought? What does that tell us about the climate drivers behind it, its potential persistence, and things like that? And could I go to the first slide then to try to...
Just hit that right button. There you go, and you can see them here.
Oh, there we go. This is the geographic context, and we can see that great big red bullseye over California. You know, we've had up to 89% of the state in severe drought, over 60% in exceptional drought. But I want you to also notice that this drought doesn't end at the state borders. This drought creeps out across the Southwest, and you can see it, of course, over New Mexico, portions of Nevada, portions of Arizona. It's got a focal point in the Southwest United States. Right now, the bullseye is over California, but this is a regional phenomenon. It's not one that's just left within our state borders. And what's particularly troubling to us who deal with water in California is you can see that it extends up towards the headwaters of the Colorado River, which is, of course, a major source of water for us here in the Southland. That's the geography of this drought. I want you to keep two things in mind. Bullseye on the Southwest, and then look at the Northeast, the Great Lakes area. As you know from the news, they're certainly not in drought today. Is there a relationship? There
Glenn,
might be.
Before you go on, that darkest area there that covers a good piece of central California, it's described as exceptional drought, which is an official term, right? How bad is, I mean, it's the worst type, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's the worst that we have a measure for, and this is a U.S. Drought Monitor product. And what it looks at is it looks at the long-term hydrological balance of a region, and it looks at the drought in comparison to what its long-term hydrology would be. This is one of these things that you don't expect to get much more than 10% of the time or less. I mean, this is really at the top of the charts in terms of a drought. And they pop up, and they'll pop up regionally and things like that. But what's interesting here is such a large part of the state now is in severe or exceptional drought. And again, let's think, how exceptional is it? If I could flip to the next slide. This is the longer-term context that we're talking about here of this drought. And I want you to, it's kind of a complex diagram. The current drought that we're facing, in terms of its complexity, no one living today, if we look at the calendar year 2000, no one living today has experienced as dry a year in California because it's drier than any year that we have in historical records. Those historical records go back 100 to 150 years. So we're experiencing something that our parents didn't experience, our grandparents didn't experience. You really have to go back to Native American times to have anything quite like what we're facing today. So folks, we're making history right now. Okay, we're all making history right now.
So when my grandparents say, oh, this is nothing, the drought of 24, that was the big one.
This kicks the drought of 24s behind, I'll tell you. But if we take a look at 1 year of severe drought, we can handle that pretty well. Well, we've got a lot of water infrastructure, and we'll learn about that later. But take a look at these graphs. The pink one up at the top, that's temperature over the southwestern United States. Because remember, we're embedded in the Southwest. What I want you to notice is once we get to the 1980s, that temperature goes off the charts there. And you think about the drought this year. This has been a winter without a winter for us in Southern California. I was out surfing on the weekend. We had 80-degree temperatures yesterday. We've got a paucity of rainfall, but we've ramped up our evaporation. And that's what's really making this drought super severe. We're losing water like crazy through evaporation and transpiration. If we take a look at these other lines there, lines of precipitation, and of drought severity and flow of the Colorado River, which are the blue ones. What you're seeing is, starting at about the year 2000, 2001, a noisy but pretty steady progression to drier conditions. A lot of us call this the 21st century drought. It kicks in about 2001. 2005 was pretty bad. We've had several bad years since then. But in general, if we look at the Southwest, and that's what the maps are showing us there, the two, map B and C, if we look at the Southwest, average conditions for this first decade or so of the 21st century have been drought. It's been dry. There has not been 1 year since the beginning of this century where there was not a large portion of the Southwest under drought. It may not have always been California. When we've had a wet year, though, all you had to do is go across the border to Arizona and New Mexico, and you would find drought there. So we're in something called the 21st century drought. That's what's troubling to me. This isn't something that just popped out of nowhere. It's in a period of dry conditions.
Is this beginning to say, then, it's not just the regular drought cycle that is we have record of? Are you scientists now being able to begin to say, yes, this is looking like it fits the models for climate change?
That's a good question, and let me just see if we can go ahead and take a look at that. This is from the last IPCC assessment. IPCC Assessment Report 4 came out in 2007, won the Nobel Prize.
And this is the international planning group that has brought all the best data together.
That's exactly right. Hundreds and hundreds of scientists working with thousands and thousands of publications, over 20 climate models. And by the way, the new assessment report came out 2013, and portions of it are coming out now. Not much big change. Despite years, more work on the models, more refinement, patterns are looking very similar. Take a look at those. This is a prediction of what's going to happen to runoff. That's the water that goes into our reservoirs, the water that will refill our wetlands, the water that will recharge our aquifers. This is runoff, so it's the product of precipitation minus evaporation. Remember, we're really warm now, so that evaporation is important. Those red areas and yellow areas are where the models predict the 21st century is going to have significant decreases in runoff. That's a combination of the higher temperatures and lower precipitation. Again, the Southwest, we've got a great big bullseye on us, and you can see this sweeps across about 30 degrees north latitude into the Mediterranean. Southern Hemisphere, take a look at Australia, South Africa, portions of South America. Take a look also at the blue areas. That's the areas where we think precipitation is going to increase. Take a look how it arcs over into the Great Lakes and the northeastern portion of North America. Folks, what's happening today? Detroit's pretty close to breaking their record for snowfall. We've had unbelievably cold conditions and very moist conditions over the northern Great Lakes and the northeastern United States. It's all part of one weather pattern. Guys, they're getting our precipitation out there, and I bet you they're going to say they'd like to give some of it back to us right now. But that's what's going on. The pattern we're seeing geographically and the intensity is consistent of what we would predict for the 21st century. It's not the smoking gun. We can't say for sure this is anthropogenic greenhouse-induced
human-generated.
Yes, absolutely. But the geography is consistent, the intensity is consistent. And there's that pattern that you see today. That's what the February 2014 analysis for North America, you can see the pattern that we just showed you from the IPCC diagrams.
And what is that referring to when it says the calibration period, that 50-year period?
That's where they say the average over that period, 1951 to 2001, that's the kind of normal, the late 20th century. And we already know that we were getting warming during that period. So that would be a warmer and drier period than if we were to take and calibrate it from 1900 to 1950.
Or before the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. We're already looking at a planet that's had a fair amount of greenhouse gases added. But the fact of the matter is, we're seeing, even compared to that, look at how severe that drought is based on Palmer Drought Index, and look at the geographic pattern there.
We should keep running through these so we can bring up some of those other guests, but I know you've got 2 or 3 more of these.
Very quickly, This is the prediction based on analysis of a whole lot of climate models by a fellow named Rich Seeger and Gabriel Vecchi, two people who worked on this. The prediction of what's going to happen with winter precipitation over the southwestern United States as we move to the year 2100. And take a look at this. You see those blue and red lines? That's giving us our estimates of precipitation minus evaporation. You got to consider evaporation at the same time you consider precipitation. We're heading into a situation where conditions that we've had over this decade, they're going to be pretty normal to wet. Droughts like we're experiencing right now, models predict that we'll go from a 3 to 5 year pattern of dry years to something like an 18 to 14 year pattern of dry years.
Wow.
So just imagine, take the last 5 years, say that's the average. That's average conditions. And on top of that, then, we will have droughts even more severe than we're facing today. That is not a very good prognosis. That's supposed to kick in with full force as we move towards the middle of this century.
And I know a lot of the focus has been on 2050. Before we bring up your colleague as our next guest here, Madeline, you are also a student of history. You've looked at how cultures in the past have handled or largely not handled similar challenges, not as great a challenge. Are we better equipped as a civilization to meet this challenge than some of these past folks who didn't?
Well, let's take a look. Let's go back into the past. I had some data, but I think I'm just going to talk about this. Folks, this is Chaco Canyon. This is Pueblo Bonito. And these are the most impressive ruins that we have in North America for pre-Columbian society, masonry and adobe ruins. If that was an apartment building, we're not sure it is, it would have been the biggest apartment building in North America until the beginning of the 20th century. That's how big that was. And that's not the only one of those pueblos in Chaco Canyon. Those pueblos in Chaco were abandoned all about the 12th century. And we know from tree ring records, lake sediments, speleothems from caves, that was a period of warmer temperatures and very pronounced drought in the southwest. That drought, which affected California, affected the Chumash peoples right here in Southern California, that didn't last 5 or 10 years. We know that that drought, from numbers of different lines of geological and biological evidence, it lasted 50 years. And we see the abandonment of Chaco Canyon there. We have a couple things going for us, though. Of course, we have wonderful engineering. We have wonderful water infrastructure. For their time, they had irrigation. They had pretty good water management as well, but that drought overwhelmed that capacity. But we have something else, and besides technology, we have the ability to look over the horizon. We understand much more about long-term climate variability, and we can begin to model the climates of the future. We can see a little bit what's coming our way. The challenge for us is to plan. The challenge is to take advantage of that science and to plan for a year where droughts like we have now, even if it's natural, it means we can't assume that they're not going to happen again. If it's anthropogenic, then we might assume it's going to get worse. But we can see that. The folks at Chaco, they didn't have that potential. So I think that science can be a very, very helpful aid to us now. The question is, how will the policy and how will the engineering take advantage of the insights we hope we're providing?
And we'll be getting into that with much of what is left to us in the time we have this evening. Just one more question. What is this perfect drought?
Well, perfect drought, and we could say we're in one right now. It's a concept that I've worked on, which is, if you look at Southern California, we don't get all of our water here from precipitation, local water sources. We haven't done that since the time of Bill Mulholland built the Los Angeles Aqueduct, opened in 1913, just over 100 years ago.
Chinatown.
Yeah, absolutely. We get water from local sources. We get it from Northern California through the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the State Water Project. We get it from the Colorado River, biggest supplier of water in Southern California. A perfect drought is when all of those three areas, we're talking almost half of the United States here, all of those three areas experience a drought at the same time, and that drought lasts beyond our planning horizon of 3 to 5 years. We're pretty much in one now. We've had them in the future, in the past, but they've tended not to go much beyond 3 to 5 years. 1987 to 1991. Anyone remember that? That was a really, really pronounced perfect drought. Folks, we're in one now that chances are it's going to definitely surpass anything we've experienced in the past. It's possible. But the climate is a very, very tricky thing. And we could well have a change. We could have an El Nino next year, and we'll get a year of rainfall. Worst thing we could do, though, is take that rainfall and, give a big exhale and stop thinking about it. These water resource challenges aren't going to go away. What we've seen happen this year shows us, as great as our infrastructure is, we've still faced some real problems with this one. We got a plan to do better in the future.
All right, Glenn, very good start. I know you'll be sticking around and participating when we get into some open discussion. Don't go away. You can stay right in that chair. We're not that much like Carson. You don't have to move down the line. I want to bring up one of your colleagues at the Institute at UCLA. Madeline Glickfeld is Assistant Director for Outreach and Strategic Initiatives and the UCLA Water Resources Group Director in the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. She works with public and private agencies to understand their science and policy analysis needs, and then she connects them with faculty at UCLA. She also has oversight of the IOES, that's the Institute, the IOES outreach to the region. This includes lectures, conferences, films, and many other sorts of programs. Madeline served as Assistant Secretary of Resources for the California Natural Resources Agency. She is currently a member of the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, a position that you were appointed to by both Governor Schwarzenegger and Brown. So please help me welcome Madeline Glickfeld. It's working.
Thank you.
Can you hand her that remote? Oh, it's right over there. Great, you got it already.
I'm good at getting the remote.
That's good. We like that, Madeline. Listen, first of all, give us some background. Tell us what the Water Resources Working Group is that I know Glenn is also involved with.
Well, the Institute of the Environment was formed by faculty who were working in the environment and felt that their disciplinary silos were not going to allow them to address the problems, that they needed to run across those silos. So that's why the Institute was created. More recently, the issue of water has become so important, and we have people working in water in the Department of Sociology, in public affairs, in public health, in the law school, all across the campus, engineering and technology. And we felt that it was really important to address the kinds of problems that we're talking about today and to understand them better, to help those people get to know each other and know each other's skills and look at the problems in a much broader way. And we're doing that. We have a project now that we're working on, a multidisciplinary project that is going to try to understand what what really is local water in Los Angeles after years and years of importing water. What is our local water situation? We're also looking at the governance of Los Angeles water, which is very, very complex. Over 100 water agencies in the southern part of the county providing water, retailing water. And we are also doing a project in the Central Valley, which is a really important project to me personally, where I'm working with a chemical engineer who has a treatment system that will allow the treatment of well water. And we have 250,000 people that live in migrant labor communities in the Central Valley and the Salinas Valley whose water is so polluted with nitrates that they can't drink their water. They're being given bottled water too.
Nitrates from the fertilizers that are used
and the dairies,
to make everything
and
grow.
so those people literally do not have water in their homes, and that it's sort of a basic right to get water. So we're working on bringing the technology, but it's not only the technology; it's knowing how to get the resources to those people and what works for them and what doesn't work for them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that technology will be at least a piece of the solution here and there
Absolutely.
across the state. You also have some slides focused on the areas that you're most interested in.
Right.
And I know some of this has to do with California's water distribution system. And I love the name that you've given it, which is on that first slide.
Well, the reason I call it plumbing is that there's a lot of nature in there, but we have replumbed California's water system to a degree I don't think ever known by anybody across the world. The delta which all the water from the Sierras flows into, either from the south, from the San Joaquin Valley, or the north from the Sacramento Valley, in the Sacramento Valley and the Sierras, is one of the great deltas of the world, and all the water flows right through there. But we've now reversed some of the flows. We get water going uphill instead of downhill, and we've diverted a lot of that water from the northeast from the northeast of the state, where most of the water is, down to Southern California, and also down to the southern San Joaquin Valley, which never had any water. So a lot of that's coming across to us. And by the way, we're not the only ones importing it. The Hetch Hetchy Dam in Yosemite area is taking water to the San Francisco on the West Peninsula side, and the Molokamami River. I hope I'm not murdering that. Somebody will kill me. It takes water directly to the East Bay. So the urban areas of California have really relied heavily on imported water.
That's so interesting. You don't often hear, maybe the Northern Californians don't like to talk about San Francisco.
They don't
also
like it.
Has a piece of that.
No, they keep on talking about us taking their water, but they're taking somebody else's water too. So I think that's an important part of this discussion. But this water system has not been without its cost. It's getting more and more expensive, and I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and you continue this in showing some of these imported water sources. I think on your next slide.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hit the remote button there on the right side button there. There they are.
So we talked a little bit. We have water coming from the Colorado River, and you can see a picture of Boulder Dam with the water level way down. And we talked a little bit about the Sacramento Delta and the State Water Project coming south along the aqueduct that's shown on the map before. And then finally the Los Angeles, who doesn't know Chinatown? So we have the water coming from the eastern Sierras into the Owens River, and then into what's called the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which was 100 years old last year. So what's really important to know about all of this is that hauling all this water around the state is the biggest electricity use in the entire state of California. And we lose a lot of it through evaporation. So it's a very energy intensive, very resource intensive way of getting water here. And although we think of water as pristine, one of the things we have to remember is that there has never been a new drop of water created. All the water that is here now has been here for billions of years. So all of this water that's coming to us have been used by a lot of people before that gets to us. Some of it treated well, some of it not treated well. So we do a lot of water treatment once it gets here. So this is not like rain falls into your water pipes. This is a very expensive system for assuring reliable water.
You already mentioned in passing the very complex situation that we have here in Southern California. Would you say over 100 agencies?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit more.
Wow.
You were telling me Pasadena is a great example of that.
Yeah, there are, just south of the San Gabriel Mountains, as I said, we have water importers. We have the MWD as a water importer. We have Los Angeles, that the Metropolitan Water District imports water for the State Water Project that came from Sacramento through the Delta, and they import water from the Colorado, and they sell it to about 14, is that right? 26 member agencies from San Diego up to Ventura. And those agencies, in turn, have nested in them maybe some of them as many as 30 to 40 different water agencies. In Los Angeles County, 75% of the water agencies only serve 250,000 people. So there's so many of them that you and I could live across the street from one another and be in another water agency. And guess what? My shower is cheaper than your shower. So that is it's a very difficult system where people don't know where to go, don't really know who's responsible for getting their water to them. If they have problems, they can't really say or do much about it. So 25% of the water serves 9.75 million people. 25% of the agencies serve the huge bulk of people, but there's a lot of people, and coincidentally, a lot of poor people that get water from these small water agencies.
And also a very difficult policy-making situation.
It is. So the city of Pasadena, as you said, has 4 different water agencies. It has the city of Pasadena has its own water department. There's something called the Kinaloa Water District, which is an irrigation district that probably happened when this was all orange groves. And then there are a couple of other private water agencies that supply water in the city of Pasadena. So when there needs to be conservation, who do you go to? When you have water that you'd like to recycle, how do you create those connections where you want to capture more stormwater, but the stormwater is held by surface rights by one party, but not by the other? It's really complicated. And when you get into groundwater, it gets even more.
Which we will. We'll
That's
get
right.
into a little bit of groundwater.
Right.
I think your next slide has a table that also amplifies this situation.
So I think that, I'm going to do that. I
Yeah,
forgot,
push
that's
that
me.
button.
Okay.
There you go.
So what I think one of my messages is that there seems to be, and our water engineer can correct me if I'm wrong, but I see a remarkable amount of consensus in the water community and in the environmental community that it's best for us all if we start relying more on local water sources. It's not like we haven't had any in the past. About 1/3 of our water comes from local sources, and I'll say more about that. But there's a reason for this. First of all, because of, we think, climate change and the droughts that Glenn has talked about, the State Water Project and the LA Aqueduct and the Colorado River Project are just not as reliable as they used to be because these droughts are getting longer. The State Water Project has a lot of water use before it comes to us. There are a lot of nutrients that drain into the water from farming, and there's a lot of salts from farming as well. The Colorado River has other problems, and they have a chromium problem. They have some metal problems. So that water, when it comes to us, we have huge treatment plants that have to treat that water before it comes to us. And the State Water Project is probably going to get a lot more expensive if we decide to do some kind of a diversion around the delta to increase reliability. It's going to come at a significant cost. The aqueduct, the LA Aqueduct on the eastern side of the Sierras hasn't got a water quality problem, but it's becoming more expensive too, as is the Colorado, because the cheap sources of energy that we had to bring that water from Colorado and the very cheap sources of energy that cheap water contracts that we've had are going to get more and more expensive. So every time that happens, it's a sensible thing for our water agencies to say, wow, well, things we didn't think we could do to use more local resources now make sense. And water prices have gone up considerably in the last year, and all kinds of things are making sense that didn't make sense before.
I can't wait to get our third guest up here, but before we do that, I want to ask you one more, because this is another thing you and I talked about, and that has to do with the factors at work here in Southern California that, in a sense, tend to mask, or, pardon the expression, submerge the seriousness of the situation that we face. Did I get that right?
I think so. I think, first of all, we have pretty good water agencies. The big ones are good, and they've worked really, really hard to have all kinds of redundant systems, and we have taken advantage of our groundwater basins. Many of you probably don't know what a groundwater basin is. Maybe I should talk a little bit about
quickly.
that. So I'm going to move that forward. So this is the watersheds of Los Angeles County, the big ones, the LA River and the San Gabriel River and the mountains that feed that. And that's about 30% of our water is coming from those mountains now. We have actually snowpack up on the top of these mountains, and so it's a natural reservoir. But when they come down into the basin, and we have paved over almost all of this area, but we've reserved some areas that we call spreading basins. And so you can see the Rio Hondo spreading basins in this slide, where we divert water that's coming out of the mountains in non-storm periods, and we infiltrate it into groundwater.
And I see these stretches along the 605 freeway.
Yeah. So if I go back, though, to this, you would have to look at all those tiny little sort of ochre yellow spots. There aren't that many of them. And this used to be a huge sponge that created groundwater basins. My friend at the water quality, the San Gabriel Water Quality Authority tells me that right here underneath us right now is a groundwater basin that's as big as Lake Tahoe. It has a lot of pebbles in it, but it's as big as Lake Tahoe, and they're not completely filled. And so what we do now is we store water not only from natural sources, but we import water and store them in these basins by infiltrating them in here. We take recycled and reclaimed water and store them and infiltrate them there and blend that water. So we have a lot more water resources here, whereas the places, ironically, that have the water naturally don't have this kind of redundancy, don't have this kind of management, and they're running out. So we have the water from there, and we also are making really good use of our own resources. And so this is sort of what we see happening right here, right now, so that we actually haven't had to declare an emergency yet. And so the average person thinks, well, we're not under mandatory conservation, and it seems to be green around me, and everybody, it seems fine, but it's only those of you who actually go hiking out in the mountains and see how dry it is out there that know that there's a real difference and there's a drought going on.
So you've already looked over to our third guest for reassurance, confirmation.
I just want to make sure I'm saying something he's not going to say, oh my gosh.
I think we better get him up here. Kevin Wattier has been general manager of the Long Beach Water Department for nearly 13 years. He spent another 13 years prior to that working for the Metropolitan Water District, which has come up, and I bet will come up again this evening. When I asked my friend scientist and Aquarium of the Pacific President Jerry Schubel to suggest a water professional for this discussion, he immediately recommended Kevin. He described Kevin as smart, honest, and articulate, and that was more than good enough for me. The Long Beach Water Department has been around since 1911. It serves my hometown of about 460,000 residents, the seventh largest in California. The LBWD's water conservation effort has been applauded around the state and the nation, and I happen to know, Kevin, when I told these folks that you were going to be part of this, they were also pleased because Long Beach is such a great example, I suppose, for agencies all over our region. Please help me welcome Kevin Wattier.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
You bet. How's business?
Free media is really popular. We're getting lots of free media these days. We love it. So that's what we thrive on, is free media.
Yeah.
Free media.
Maybe we'll get to talking about the message that a lot of that free media is carrying, because I know you have some thoughts about that as well. Madeline, why were you so happy to see that Kevin and Long Beach would be represented here?
Well, this is the second drought declaration in the last, 5 years? Long Beach led the way to mandatory conservation last time. Long Beach operates a sewage treatment plant that my regional board has just taken some highly treated water from their sewage treatment plant and replaced imported water by infiltrating this water into our saltwater intrusion barrier. This is really important that we have this saltwater intrusion barrier, and we're using our reclaimed water, which is really high quality, to replace the imported water, which we don't have. He just put in enough water to serve 7,000 homes for a year for that. So there's a lot of things he's doing that are really, really admirable, and he's leading the way.
Well, we're not alone. And really, that's kind of what I want to talk about. And it's really a good way to play off of the comments. If you look at what's happening in Southern California, it's really a really good news story. I know, and the public doesn't hear much about it, but what's really happening is we are relying more and more on those local supplies. There's wonderful things going on around Southern California, and I can, if we want to, I can get into specific examples, but really we're doing the things that Madeline's talking about. We're recycling a lot more. We're using our groundwater basins. There's a lot more opportunity to do those things. And I think we're being driven by, the things that Glenn talked about. We're being driven by the realities of what's happening with our climate. And you see a lot of really positive things going on, not only in Long Beach, but throughout all of Southern California, really integrating the various phases of the water cycle, conservation, recycling, local stormwater. And of course, there's tremendous goals that Los Angeles and others have adopted that can really go a long ways towards meeting our water supply.
We're going to come back to all of that.
Right.
But let me ask you, as somebody who's really in the trenches,
Right.
keeping those water mains filled, are you beginning to get the sense that this is a pretty unique sort of drought?
Yes and no. What's unique about this drought, is, as Madeline says, we just got out of one. We had one in 2007 to 9. We were out of it for 2 or 3 years, and we're right back in it. In fact, some people say we never really got out of it. Climate scientists can say we had one wet year, among a streak of 8 or 10. And if you consider that we didn't get out of it, then we're really in the 8th year of a 2007 to 2014 drought, with 2011 being one wet year in that 8-year cycle. So either we were in one and out of it and back in it, which is unprecedented for modern Southern California, or we're in the 8th year of an 8-year drought. And who knows if it's the 8th year of a 10 or a 15-year drought. So yes, it's unique, and because of that, we just got out of one and got right back into it. The other thing that's unique, and I have a couple slides if I can show them.
Yeah, please do. I know you didn't want to leave all the graphs and charts to the
I just
scientists
have a
and-
couple, but I really want to make a point, because it really leads into a lot of how we manage water in California.
Go ahead, hit that one more time. There you go.
This is the precipitation. I'm going to show precipitation first, and then I'm going to show snowpack and show you how dramatically different they are this year, and it's really playing off some of the comments Glenn made. This is, some of our water here in Southern California comes from the northern Sierras. So this is the precipitation in the northern Sierras, the watershed of the state and federal water projects, which up until February was horrible. We were on record for this to be the driest water year ever. It's no longer going to be a record-setting year. This is on a October 1st water year, but it could still be close to one of the worst. So right now, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, we're at about 54 or 55% of normal precipitation in that watershed. But if you look at snowpack, this is where you see a dramatic problem. And this is so just look at the top slide. That's the northern Sierra. So it's the same area I showed you the precipitation for. The snowpack there is the lowest ever recorded. It's lower than 76, 77. And one thing that I was tasked with many years ago to bring a speaker to MWD, Peter Glick, who did a lot of the original climate change work. And what he was saying then, and what the climate change models have been saying about California, is we don't necessarily expect the amount of precipitation we get to change, but we expect more rain and less snow and earlier snowpack. And if you take away one thing from that slide, look at that slide. Again, we're at 55% precipitation. We're at, I think that slide shows 17%. We're at 16% snowpack in the northern Sierras. Normally they should be about the same. If we've got 55% precip, we should have about 55% snowpack. It's about a third. The snowpack's about a third of the precip. So if I can go backwards, I don't know if I can or not.
I think you might need to go.
Anyway.
Oh, try going. You might need to go forward, but I think they're resetting it.
If you look at the blue line on the bottom, those are the only 2 major rain events we had come through California this year. And they were both what scientists used to call pineapple expresses, and they now call them atmospheric rivers. I guess that's the modern terminology. But they were both very warm. In fact, in the last one that came through here late February, early March, we got more precip in our local mountains than they did in the northern Sierras. But they were both very warm storms. We didn't have any Arctic cold storms come through California this year. Not a single one. So that snowpack is horribly low. And the point I want to make about this then impacts our whole way of managing water in California, because that snowpack is our biggest reservoir. Water managers rely on that snowpack to hold that water and then to slowly release it through April, May, June, usually out until July, and then they release it into the rivers and pump it through the aqueducts and everything else. And we've lost, at least for this year, our largest reservoir. It's only 17% of normal. So, there's a lot of talk right now about, do we need to build new reservoirs? I think that's a discussion we need to have, because with the loss of the snowpack, those reservoirs, that big reservoir is going away.
And the other reservoirs, the ones most of us think of as reservoirs, the major ones around the state, I saw another graph or chart that showed those are at pretty shockingly low levels as well.
they're a little more than half as full as they were a year ago, and we're going to get almost no runoff this year. I mean, 17, 16%, and if we have some sublimation with this warm weather, a lot of that won't even run off. So they're going to be in really rough shape by the end of the summer.
So we go back to that evaporation question that Glenn was talking about. Does this stuff, is it keeping you up at night?
No, I sleep good.
Good.
My wife says I snore too much. So I want to turn to the positive stuff. We're moving to solve this problem. And we're doing things here in Southern California. The water agencies are responding to this. There's tremendous things going on. What's interesting is if you really look at it, and there's some people in the audience that I know have been talking about this for decades, the obstacle you get into as we start doing more and more recycling and all these things and what we're doing and what's happening right now, we have good supplies this year from the Colorado River and very, very, zero supplies from Northern California. You get into a salinity problem because as you recycle and recycle and recycle, you concentrate the salt. And sooner or later, you get into a problem with what are you going to do with this salt. Now, some visionary agencies in Southern California have built brine lines and have ways of disposing of that salt, but eventually it becomes the constraint to this, recycling. You need to have an outlet for that salt. So in the Santa Ana River watershed, they've had their brine line for years, and they've expanded it. And now you have a brine line being built out in Ventura County because they're starting to do more of the same kind of stuff in Ventura County where they're doing a lot more recycling. And so now they've built an outlet for salt to the ocean. And so these things are happening. There's a lot of positive things happening with more and more local water supply development throughout Southern California.
How much more can and should we be doing through conservation?
Well, it's interesting. I had to talk to one of my kids' science classes once, and someone asked me, what's the difference between an engineer and a scientist? And I had to go figure it out myself. And the difference is engineers apply science to solve problems. That's what the books say. And so, quite frankly, the solution to this current crisis, the current crisis that we're in, which we don't know whether it's going to be over next year or whether we'll have an El Nino and whether it'll be a wet El Nino or a dry El Nino, there's only one solution to this crisis, and it's conservation. And the only thing we can do, the only thing we as a state can do is conserve, conserve, conserve. It's too late to build our way out of this crisis. And to go even further, we have to do this through changed public behavior. We waste tremendous amounts of water in every city in California every day. We waste it. We flush it down our streets. We hose down our driveways. In Australia, they use half as much as water as we do in California, and they're doing just fine. We have to educate the public that we need to stop doing this. All the toilet rebates in the world are great things to do for the long term, but right now we need to tell the people of California, you need to stop wasting water, and you need to do it yesterday. We dropped water consumption across the region in 2007-9 by 15 to 20%. We need to do it again. We need to get with it.
So you've got a problem with, like touchy-feely commercials showing cute kids turning off the faucet as they brush their teeth.
Yeah, we need to do in California with water wasting what we did in this state with smoking. We need to make it socially unacceptable. It needs to be as unacceptable to waste water as it is to light up a cigarette in a crowded elevator. It needs to be something that's just not part of our, it's something that's not acceptable in the state. We've passed the point where we can afford to flush huge amounts of water down the drain. We need to stop it. And we can do it. It's not that hard. We spend 50 to 70% of our water growing grass in California. It's crazy. We need to stop doing that.
Yeah, I got a bone to pick with you there because my wife and I put in a lot of work in our front yard, put in a drought-tolerant front yard. We love it. It's beautiful. 2 months later, the city announces its program. We could have gotten a lot of money for doing that.
No good deed will go unpunished.
So I thought. Madeline, I think you're dying to get in on this.
Well, I think he's right that it has to be a societal thing that we all realize that wasting water is bad and that we don't need to waste it. But we have a lot that our water districts can do to stop wasting water. And as a regional board member, I've seen some very strange things. So we have cases where we have a lot of polluted water, and I wanted to talk about this. One of our biggest problems is that I strongly think that our groundwater basins are where we're going to store a lot of water. And we're going to be able to get through a lot of bad years by conserving and storing water there. But they're highly polluted from defense industries, oil, all kinds of things. People, people have told me if there's a little depression somewhere, people would put some toxic waste there. So we have a lot of problems that we need to do in cleaning up that basin. But we have lots of room to store more water there. What we can't continue to do, for instance, is have the people who are cleaning up that water pump it out, treat it, and then send it down the storm drain.
You told me a crazy story about buildings all over Southern California that are doing exactly that.
So that's something else. That's because, like on a place called, there's La Cienega Boulevard, it's called that because it was the swamp. There's very high groundwater there. There's very high groundwater in lots of places. But people are digging deep basements for parking, multiple parking levels in big buildings and single parking levels. And in the basement of each of these places, there's a sump pump. And the sump pump is pumping the water out so it doesn't flood the basin, the basements, and then pumping it out and sending it down the street into the storm drains. One of my colleagues on the board, the current chairman, knew that this was happening in his kids' school, and they are now treating that water and using it for landscaping. That's what everybody should be doing. We should not be able to tolerate having 20% leakage in our water systems. We shouldn't be able to tolerate throwing water away. And when the public starts taking care of these things, then maybe we'll be able to encourage individuals to do more too. One more thing, we should be able to do gray water recycling and gray water reuse on our own properties, and we should have it should be easy. One of my colleagues, Yoram Cohen, has developed a really wonderful gray water treatment system that could sit in this little area here, and you could have a lot of watering done just by reusing the water that's going into your house. So there's a lot of things we're not doing that we could be doing.
Kevin, when I go to a park in Long Beach, I often see the little signs that say, "Don't drink from this sprinkler." Long Beach is making use of gray water.
That's recycled water, and there's a number of agencies throughout Southern California that have done that. We're not the leader. Our Irvine Ranch is probably the recognized leader with what they've done in Irvine.
Irvine Ranch Water District?
Yeah, they've got it in high rises down there. And then the other really great project that all of us in California, or actually around the world, admires what they've done at the Orange County Water District and with the sanitation district there, where they're taking their treated sewage, treating it to a very high level, and integrating it with their groundwater basin. And again, that's the key. The problem you get into with sewage water is, if you're just trying to match your sewage flow to your irrigation demand, you get all this water in the winter that you don't know what to do with because you don't have, hopefully, too much demand. This year you do, but in most winters there isn't much demand for irrigation water in the winter. So if you're going to turn that sewage water into a water supply, you need to store it. I mean, that's the classic California water problem, is storing water that you don't need so you can use it when you do need it. And so to me, the beauty of what they've done in Orange County is they're storing that winter recycled water that they don't have another use for in their groundwater basin so they can then use it when they need it. So, that program in Orange County gets awards, around the world for what they've done with recycling. So yeah, we have it in Long Beach too, mainly golf courses and parks and such.
Madeline mentioned this question about leaky pipes, leaky mains. Do you agree this is another big problem?
It's all over the place. Some places have it's a lot of issues.
Some worse
cities,
than
the
others.
bigger ones, I think, are. 10% is kind of the norm. Most of the bigger cities in California are like 4 to 5, which is what we in Los Angeles are. But some of the older cities, it's a real problem. Yeah.
It seems like if you get up to the top end of that, 10, you said something about 20, Madeline?
Actually, there are a few cities in Los Angeles County that are experiencing 20 to 30% leakage. That's how much leaks out before it gets into anybody's abode. And some of the cities don't repave their streets. They have to go in there and patch leaks so much. So this is also a policy issue and a policy decision by the water agency about what they're going to invest in replacing old water lines. And when you don't invest, you end up having the customer paying one way or the other. They're going to pay for the new lines and more efficient service, or they're going to pay for water that never gets to them. So I think we have to decide that it's not okay to waste 20, even 10% of the water. I think what I'm really impressed with what Long Beach is doing at 4%. It's hard to keep leaks from happening, but if you do this kind of replacement, and if people in these communities realize how important this is to do, then and they support it, that's really important.
All right, here's some fighting words, at least for some folks. Is water too cheap in California?
It's not in Los Angeles.
Well, I'm thinking of in terms of, for example, the people who call for increases in the gas tax to reduce consumption of gasoline, which brings its own problems. I mean, don't agencies like yours face problems if people, if they can serve your agency, other agencies, you're not going to bring in as much revenue
Well,
to maintain the system?
there's a lot made of that. I don't really, when you're a local agency in Southern California that has a local supply, which is your cheapest supply, and then you buy some water from the Metropolitan Water District to only what you need because it's more expensive, and you don't buy that and don't resell it, it hurts a little bit, but to be honest with you, it's not a big deal. Much has been made about that. In my opinion, it's not a big deal. What is a big deal is we have a constitutional amendment in this state that says you can't charge more for water than it costs. It's called Prop 218, and it's been the subject of extensive court interpretation since that was passed. And there's been a recent negative ruling down in Orange County that says that if we wanted to do what you just talked about, it would be illegal. So as a state, we have to talk about that. Do we want to allow water agencies in drought emergencies to be able to charge more for water to encourage conservation? It's a question right now. It's in the courts as to whether or not you can do that legally or not in California. It's an important policy issue. The Public Policy Institute of California came out with a report last week on paying for water in California, and it highlights that issue, and it says it's something that as a state we need to deal with. Because if we want to do that, we need to decide we're going to do it, and we need to make sure it's legal.
Madeline?
Yeah, well, I can tell you one place where it's too cheap, and that's in the San Joaquin Valley. My colleague might disagree with me, but my gosh, the farmers are finally putting in drip irrigation this year. Then they have finally started to put meters on water. This year, they haven't had metered water in the valley before, and so it's been a recipe for waste. And I think that we would have a lot more water to go around if there were ways, if prices were not so low. On the other hand, we'd be paying more for food. Maybe Glenn could have.
Glenn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something important to remember in the discussion is both the small impact of what we do in the cities, it really is in some ways, but also what a huge impact it is. And why do I say it's a small impact? In this state, over 80% of the water is used in the agricultural sector. The cities, depending where you are, 15, 20% of the water is utilized for all the people of the state in the cities. Vast majority of the water here is used in agriculture. You may not think that's true in Southern California, but folks, it is. Imperial Valley, Coachella District, Palos Verdes District, agricultural districts in the east, they use far more water than Metropolitan Water District does. They use, in Imperial, the vast majority of the Colorado River water is used there. Now, you might say that some of its uses are inefficient. And for instance, there's a lot of flood irrigation in Imperial because it's inexpensive to do it that way, and you have the water available very cheaply because seniors water rights on the Colorado River. On the other hand, we get much of our winter vegetables and produce from there. Much of the alfalfa that's utilized for dairy production is used there. About 2/3 of the winter vegetable crop used in the United States comes out of the Southern California. We're a big agricultural area. San Joaquin, Sacramento Valley, arguably largest agricultural area in terms of produce in the United States. California, largest agricultural producer in the United States. That's where the water's going, 80% of it. Are there efficiencies to be gleaned? There are, in a couple of different ways. One is the type of irrigation practice that you use. Now, the thing with drip irrigation is you also have to be very careful because you increase soil salinity, right? You're putting a small amount of water in there, but your salts build up. So it can be difficult. The other issue is the cost of putting in the irrigation systems. Drip irrigation requires energy to move that water around. Farmers have to make an investment. If the margin on the crop is small, the investment is very, very difficult for the farmer to make. And finally then, it's the choice of the crops. One of the crops that they grow in Imperial Valley is turf. Where do you think that turf comes from? So we're using this cheap subsidized water to grow this turf, which we then put in our city, which sucks up our expensive water and the water that we need to run the city. It's almost like some movie about alien invasion, you know, it couldn't get more insidious. But part of the choices in what they grow is driven by us, the consumers. It's driven by us. And I often wonder, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had something on crops that says that this was a water-wise crop, that it was grown in a water-wise manner? We have this for non-GMO, we have this for organic. What about something that tells us if it's water-wise? So that's a big issue here for water in this state. It's agriculture. We shut down the agriculture. We have plenty of water for here. We could take 3-hour showers and wash our cars all day long. But that would be immoral and unethical to do that. And why it makes a big difference here for the cities is if we, first of all, can decrease our need for imported water. We can decrease our waste for water. We have then more water available to grow crops, to feed people. I think that's very important. Secondly, if we can lead by example and show that we are willing to take the tough steps to cut our consumption, we can then ask our brethren and sisters in the rural communities that we're willing to lead by example. We're willing to take the moral high road. We would like to see then the agricultural sector doing its part. Huge debate how efficient we are in terms of irrigation, differs from place to place. But just remember, folks, that water is putting food on our tables, it's putting food on tables throughout this nation. And I think we can do a good job by providing an example of wise water management, that the folks in the city are not going to be filling up the jacuzzis, running the fountains, and doing everything else, and asking the farmers to take it in the gut. But at the same time, we expect some rational choices and some contribution from the agricultural sector.
Speaking of turf, my mother is a full-time, year-round resident of the Coachella Valley. And when I drive out there, when a lot of people drive out there, you can't help but notice it is wall-to-wall golf courses. They have this beautiful shopping and entertainment center out there called The River, and it has the water to, live up to that name. Is that kind of use in an area like that sustainable? Any of you? Madeline, you're the policy wonk.
Well, I think I was going to ask either of you to talk about how much of that is local. They have a lot of local water there. They have a lot of local water rights coming from the San Jacintos.
Mountain runoff.
Yeah, so it looks like a desert, but underneath it is not a desert. The question is that the best use of the water?
Kevin?
Well, and they also get some Colorado River water, and they work with MWD to recharge their aquifer with Colorado River water. So Madeline's right. They have a very, very productive groundwater aquifer out there in the Coachella Valley.
Okay, so
but
it
we
may
all
not...
could be doing more water-wise landscaping, and they could be too.
Okay. This is Next, after all. I want to talk more about the future. And technology does play a role in that. We've had a little bit of that to talk about so far. Kevin, I was pretty proud for a while there because Long Beach had this pilot desalination plant. And people keep talking about it. Somebody was talking to me about it today for the community of Cambria up on the Central Coast. And then there was that big project in Huntington Beach. And really, this is for any of you, but if you'll start us, talk about that project, that pilot that I think is now over in Long Beach, and is there some promise in this?
Well, every situation is unique. So, what makes sense for one community may not make sense for another community, and that's, quite frankly, our situation. We had the largest seawater desal program in the country for about 7 or 8 years. Over the course of 7 or 8 years, we spent $20 million building a research facility and operating it, and we also built a submerged intake, which is an environmentally responsible, acceptable way of getting the water out of the ocean without having any impacts on fisheries. And so, you can do it. There's no question you can do it. The question is it worth it? And so when we in Long Beach look at it and we look at our choices, and we have opportunities with our groundwater basin that because of some recent court action that didn't exist until a few months ago, we have opportunities with conservation, we have opportunities with recycling, and we can always buy water from the Metropolitan Water District. You know, it gets more expensive over time, but quite frankly, it's seawater desal for us is 2 to 3 times as expensive as other alternatives. It's just that simple. So are we going to, greatly increase our rates to do that? The answer is no. I mean, sure, we'd all love to do that. We're all engineers. We like to build stuff. But it doesn't make any sense for Long Beach. Now, other parts of the state where they have a different portfolio, I mean, I don't want to say it doesn't make sense for others, but it doesn't make sense for us. So we've put all that on hold.
Madeline?
So we got plenty of water to desalt. That's fresh water. And we have a lot of technology at UCLA being developed. We think there might be some breakthroughs in desalinization. Some people on some of our conservation faculty, marine conservation faculty, are really concerned with the volume of intake of fish and other species into an intake area and what the impacts are going to be of that. And
This has been a major criticism of that plant in Huntington Beach, right? May actually stop its development.
Exactly that. And the one in San Diego was hotly debated. But I think the issue is that I agree with what Kevin said. There are lots of things that are still cheaper for us to do. And when water rates go up and down because water supply goes up and down, inevitably these desal plants are shut down because they can't compete. The other thing is electricity is getting more expensive. And if it doesn't make sense for Long Beach, which is right next to the ocean and pipes the water right in, how is it going to make any sense for Pasadena to pipe all that water uphill? So I think that I really think that this is not the best solution for this area. It may be in the future, but I think we have to do a lot of other things. We have a very promising set of technology for desalting water at UCLA and making energy. And so we're hoping that kind of contribution, we can make that contribution to making our brackish water resources usable again.
Glenn, you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I think that the desal, it's the economics of it, and it's just very, very expensive. You want to drive up the cost for the ratepayer, that's one way to do it. And with water, it's one of those repressive taxes. If the price per gallon goes up, poor people are spending a much larger proportion of their income on that than more affluent people. So I do think that there's still a lot more low-hanging fruit that we can get that is economically more beneficial than desal. Secondly, we talked about CO2 and climate warming and things like that. Right now, we don't have the solar or wind capacity to run all those desal plants, so we're going to be utilizing fossil fuels in one form or the other to do it. So in some ways, we're exacerbating some of the root causes for what we might be seeing in the 21st century. So there are places, though, where it is a solution. Australia, for instance, has done very well with it. There are ideas about, on the Sea of Cortez, putting in massive desal plant run by solar. There are places where I think it is going to make sense. Also, I think it makes a lot of sense for removing pollutants like nitrates and treating briny groundwater or agricultural runoff. I think that having these small desal plants, very efficient, if we can move them to solar, that would be great. The cost of that, though, still is very, very expensive, even for a farmer to put in a solar array to raise groundwater out of a well. Very expensive. We're talking tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to get any kind of appreciable payback from that. So it's still economics.
We're getting very close to the point where we're going to open this up to the audience here at the Crawford Family Forum as we continue this discussion of California's water crisis. It's all part of Next, People Science Tomorrow. So be thinking about your questions, folks, and we'll ask you to raise your hands in a moment or two here. Glenn, again, as we look toward the future, are we getting the data that we need now about the drought and beyond it, climate change? Or are there still holes that need to be filled so that we can build the models that are really going to show us what's ahead?
I think in terms of the data that we would look at in terms of what's going on with precipitation and temperature and things like that, we have a fairly decent array. There are always places you want to get more measurements. The mountains are still relatively poorly served for meteorological stations, also for hydrological stations. In fact, A number of states, California not as much as some others, the USGS, federal government, simply hasn't had the money to have the stream gauging stations, and stream gauging stations have gone offline. Well, it's the worst time for that to happen, because then we can't really understand what's happening to our runoff and our water supplies if we don't have those upper basin stream gauging stations. So I would say that, you know, we have a pretty good array in California. We could always use more, whether it's SNOTEL, hydrological, or meteorological. I think where the two areas that we could use more information is, one is our models looking forward. IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, uses over 20 climate models. They converge pretty closely on temperature estimates. Temperature estimates have pretty tight error bars. The models seem to be giving us about the same results. Precipitation, much more wider variance. You know what? If you look at one of the bullseyes for uncertainty and what's going to happen in precipitation, right over Southern California. The models do not converge on exactly what's going to happen on precipitation. We know it's going to get drier because evaporation and transpiration rates are going to go up. But exactly what's going to happen in precipitation, that's still an unknown. That's an area where scientists have to work harder. One of the reasons it's an unknown is the models are very poor at predicting things like El Nino and La Nina, showing those Pacific Ocean sea surface changes. They just don't capture it, and they're widely divergent on their views of what average temperatures in the Pacific might do, particularly, for instance, off the coast of South America, which drives the La Nina El Nino system. We have a lot more work to do as scientists in our linkage between the atmospheric portion and the ocean portion of the models to capture those kind of events that happen in the ocean. And so there's certain parts of the world the precipitation signal is becoming pretty clear from the models. Unfortunately, where we are, it is not. And so we as scientists, we have a lot more work to do to help us look over into the future.
Madeline?
If I could, as a policy person, I know that the Bureau of Reclamation and LA County are working really hard at trying to find out what precipitation is going to be like in the future. Not only precipitation, but what surface runoff is. And they're waiting for us to do that kind of work. They're waiting for more certainty because they would like to be able to figure out a way to conserve more water in the system. They're working on readapting the system that was meant to take floods, that we get phenomenal floods like monsoon. Our system is mainly meant to take the water out as fast as it could. Now we're trying to readapt it to slow down some of that water, store it more, and re-inject it. I'm sure all of you have wondered, why is all that water getting out of here? Why isn't somebody capturing it? Well, we're working on it.
We see a lot of that run right through our city, don't we, Kevin? The two rivers. You get together with your peers, the heads of other agencies, right? What's the sense that you get from them? Is there an air of optimism or pessimism?
Oh, I think there's an air of optimism. Again, you know, I sent out an email a couple weeks ago when I knew I was going to be on here, and I said, send me in 20 words what you've done in the last 10 years and what you're planning to do in the next 10 years. I just got all these fantastic emails. There's stuff going on all over Southern California with integrating the water cycle like Madeline talked about. Conservation, recycling, capturing stormwater. I mean, Santa Monica has adopted an official goal by 2020 to be 100% self-reliant. That's an official City of Santa Monica goal, and they have a specific plan to how they're going to get there, and I'm sure they will. Los Angeles, likewise, has adopted some very aggressive goals to reduce their imported water by 50% initially, and then ultimately to possibly be 100% self-reliant. So there's a lot of exciting things going on locally with local water supply development. Again, we need to make sure that we've got a solution to the salt buildup because that can be your obstacle. But absent that, there's a lot of exciting things that can be done, and we need to solve those things, and we will.
And I know UCLA has made a point of really taking on a big challenge in this area, but I want to come back to that in a moment because we're going to run out of time here to go to our audience. So we have Janice, our co-producer of the next series, ready to pick up our first question. Hi, introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeff Carr, and I had two questions. One is, how long could our groundwater storage last if we had no non-basin outside supplies for Los Angeles? And then the other question related, is our groundwater safety being adequately protected, do you think, at this point?
Okay, so the first one, I'm trying to think of the scenario. The big one, has cut off all water supply, external water supply to Southern California. How long before we're all extremely thirsty? Kevin, you want to start that?
Well, there's millions and millions of acre feet down there in our groundwater basins, but they all have most of our groundwater basins in Southern California are adjudicated. So there's a court order that limits how much you can pump out of them, and then there's some kind of a management entity set up to replenish them. So I'm only closely familiar with the groundwater basin that underlies southeast Los Angeles County, and we could pump it a little harder, but not too much. I mean, we need to artificially, Madeline showed the picture of the replenishment grounds, the Rio Hondo replenishment grounds. We need to artificially replenish these basins, or wells will start to dry up in a year or two. So we need to continue to recycle. We need to conserve. We need to use imported water. We need to do a better job than we have of capturing the local water. But it's not inexhaustible. There's a lot down there, but you can only extract a certain amount.
Madeline, what do you think we'd have about a year?
I think we don't know. I think we don't know because right now there's a tremendous amount of room in some of these basins to store more water, and we have not yet scaled up. We've started to do so much. You're right. There's a lot of exciting things going on, but there's a project here, a project there. There isn't the kind of scaling up throughout the entire county where we're really both conserving water, we're injecting new water supplies, we're recycling water, and we have so much imported water already in those groundwater basins, it's hard to say. But we have to start scaling up the kind of work that's happening across the county in a very sporadic way. We just need the resources to do it.
Kevin?
Matt, I want to make a point. We specifically talk about conjunctive use. That's a term that we often use, and we take it for granted because we've become so used to it, but it's a fundamental point. We've built a system, mainly in Southern California, of conjunctively using our surface reservoirs and our groundwater basins to mutual benefit. And the reason we've done that is there are physical limitations in groundwater basins in how fast you can put water into them and how fast you can take it out. And those are real limitations. They're hydraulic. You can't just dump, thousands and thousands and thousands of CFS into a groundwater basin like you can in a surface reservoir. So we need to operate those surface reservoirs to catch those big stormwater runoffs at huge flows that come down our river systems, and then at a much slower rate we move that water into our groundwater basins. So you can't just assume that groundwater basins can be the solution. They have to be operated in conjunction with our surface water systems, or it won't work.
Glenn, you were nodding enthusiastically. Did you have a comment?
No, I agree. I mean, and the other thing you got to remember about the groundwater basin here is that we have the ocean sitting off to the west of us here, and we have to maintain a barrier. As we begin to really water mine here, you get saltwater incursion, and that groundwater is completely useless for anything anyway. So.
And that kind of touches, I think, on your second question, which I don't remember exactly, but it also groundwater related. Go ahead.
How safe is our groundwater in terms of not having new pollutants?
Yeah, we obviously contamination has come up. Chromium. We hear stories now and then about stuff moving toward the water table. Are you worried about this, Kevin? I mean, you're the guy who has to make sure this stuff is pure and clean.
Well, we're fortunate in Long Beach that because of our geology that we don't have those kind of issues, but it's been more problematic in the groundwater basins where you don't have natural protection from things that occur from anthropogenic activities on the surface to the water, like in the San Gabriel Basin. As you get into the further down in the system, we have natural barriers of silt and clay that protect us against any stupid thing we people do on the surface. But we're doing a good job as a region at cleaning up these groundwater basins. We really are. I mean, there's a remarkable work going on in the San Gabriel Valley. Los Angeles has a very aggressive plan to clean up their basin. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to cost a lot of money, but I'm optimistic they're going to get the job done.
By the way, I love getting those reports on the purity of our water in Long Beach that you guys pump out. What is it, once a year, I think, something like that?
Yeah, we all do that.
Yeah, and I've actually have been to the lab with my wife and children when they were a little bit younger. A very impressive operation. Madeline, very quickly, and we'll get to another question.
Well, I just think it's really important to people that they don't have to worry about the quality of their water. And the fact that you have a lab that people can go to see that is really important. And I think we're going to have, because our groundwater basins are polluted, particularly the San Gabriel Basin's polluted, but the water districts have created this Joint Powers Authority, the Water Quality Authority, and every drop of it is cleaned before it gets into the lines. And there's a huge investment in that. So I'm hoping that Los Angeles goes the same direction.
Let's see if we can squeeze another 2 or 3 of these in here. Way in the back there. Hi, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Christina, and I want to thank you all for touching on so many different issues. I think that was great. It seems like there's a lot of thoughtfulness in terms of the local level and things that are happening. Something that I see that bugs me, though, for example, is when John Boehner came, I think last month, and you see a lot of politicization around the issues with the Sacramento Delta and the issues with the smelt and what's going on with that. But how often, my question is, how often do you see politics getting in the way of scientific fact and how to deal with the water crisis in California?
Glenn, why don't you respond to that one first? You've been up there before the Senate, and we did talk about the House meeting up north in Fresno just today.
So, you know, scientists would like to think that we put out this information and then everybody is going to immediately, you know, recognize our brilliance and the unbiased nature of our work, and it will become like gospel. But it's not like that. Typically, you know, policymakers and politicians will tend to cherry pick the reports that support their view. Their view may be informed by economics. It may be informed by their constituents who need water for their crops. Their view may be informed by political ideology or even religion. And so there's many, many things that will influence a policymaker's views beyond science. And there's a huge area of research into, in fact, I've been working on a paper with a whole international group of scientists on transborder water management and how you can successfully have science play a role and at the same time have scientists understand that the science is not going to be the only fact or the only information by which a decision will be made. You hope the decision will be made rationally based on economics, maybe cultural and social sensitivities and things like that, but science will be one bit of information. I think what I object to is when all of a sudden, because I'm a scientist, I get labeled as being one ideology or the other, or the veracity of my science and the independent nature of the investigation suddenly gets questioned as though I'm trying to make a political statement with the science instead of just delivering facts. I find that really, really irritating. I'm respectful and I understand that politicians have to balance many, many things. Science is one of them. I do take exception to when, as a climate scientist, I'm suddenly vilified that I have a socialist agenda or that I'm part of some criminal group, which is sucking money out of the system for this. It's not like that, and I'm particularly offended when I look at the young students working in my lab who are idealistic, who are trying to follow the highest scientific rigor, and they're suddenly painted by that paintbrush. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Let's see if we can get a couple more in here. We're going to go over to this side now. And hi there, sir. What is your name?
Hi, my name's Jim Smith, not an alias. And I'm the chief of the development division for LA County Parks and Rec. And my concern, since I go to a lot of these, and last Friday I was at a little topic discussion on the 2014 water bond. It's going before the state. I'm also a commissioner on the Burbank Sustainable Commission and on the water subcommittee. So I have a bunch of concerns about collaboration and a systems approach to this water subject, because it starts to get a little bit of preaching to the choir when we get together and we don't come up with down in the dirt solutions. The people in the Delta really don't like us. MWD wants to skirt the Delta with some big tunnels. We're not concerned about their culture. We also use up 20% of the energy in the state to pump water over the Tehachapis. So where's this all going? You know, the Mayans fell off the planet because they couldn't manage water. I would like somebody's response to that.
Okay.
When I run a park system that has the only open space and area where you can really percolate water into the ground in the urban context of this region,
Let's
nobody
start to
comes
get
to
their
us.
response, just because we're running out of time. James, we obviously could have had you up here on the panel, but who would like to tackle that first? Kevin?
Jim, 5 years ago, I'd have said you're absolutely right. But when I look at the world and the solutions that we need to implement here in Southern California, we have to collaborate. We have no choice. Yeah, I'd love to just be able to do whatever I want in Long Beach and have the rest of the world just go away. But we have to do what's on Madeline's chart. Our survival depends on it. We have to find a way for water agencies and sewer agencies and open space districts and environmentalists and all those people to build those multi-benefit projects, because that is our solution to California's water problem. It's the solution. We have to get beyond, I'm the water guy and I don't talk to the sewer guy and they're trying to take my money. Because we argue about that all the time. I'm not being facetious. And the water guys are in the room and the environmentalists say, oh, those guys have the money. How do we get that? But we have to find ways to make those things happen. We have to find ways to integrate our water system. We have to find a way to make the surface water, the recycled water, the storm water, the groundwater basins work together. That's our salvation for Southern California's water. We have to do it.
Necessity, still the mother of invention.
I'm going to put my regulator hat on as a water board member. We have the authority to regulate polluted stormwater in Los Angeles County. And we have just issued, a year ago, we issued for most of Los Angeles County a new stormwater permit, and just for 2 months ago for Long Beach. And in those stormwater permits, we gave them incentives and options and more time if these cities in the same watersheds organized together into watershed planning groups to figure out where the best places were to store water and where the best places were to clean water, and how to minimize what we call urban slobber, which is, that's a very technical term, which is all the water we let come off of our properties. So miraculously, we had 62 cities form into 17 groups. That's never happened in Los Angeles County before. We're now trying to get the cities in these groups to reach out to the water districts, to involve themselves with the sanitation districts. Ultimately, if the water bond goes well, if the water bond goes well that I see, in order to get that money, you're going to have to collaborate. You're going to have to find a way to provide a local share, and you're going to have to collaborate. So I'm very optimistic that we're in a different place than we were 5-10 years ago.
We are in overtime, but let's see if we can do one more. It's going to be way in the back there. My apologies to everyone else who is hoping to get in on this. Yes, sir. What is your name?
Don Fast. I share some affinity with Kevin Wadier. I retired from City of Long Beach Environmental Health and Human Services. Three points, questions.
Very quickly, please.
Okay. Given what's the worst case scenarios about precipitation coming out tonight, and given for people living in residences, with the conservation practices you're presented, could they make it cutting, not having lawns if that cuts 50%, for the farmers in the San Joaquin, wherever, could they make it, given your models of the future, with drip farming, drip agriculture? And then the last point is anybody thinking like DWP about LA DWP, that's where I live, putting in some solar in some other area and connecting it to the grid, and then using that electricity down at the beach or nearby
to do the desalination. Let me go to Glenn for at least the first of your points there, which I think we talked about somewhat.
Yeah, I honestly, optimistically, I do think that the state will have enough water. I think we will have enough water, but we have to manage it much more carefully. And that's because the models do suggest that the northern part of the states of California will probably have pretty good water. We may, precipitation, we'll have higher evaporation. That may come down to Southern California. Certainly Mexico will definitely be drier. But much more of it will come as these episodic large storms, which we're not very good at capturing that water. And we certainly do not efficiently use the water that we currently have. But when you step back and you look at the total amount of water in the state, even with climate warming, if we are very, very careful, and we are better at the cities in terms of capturing our stormwater and using it, we have recycling, our agriculture is rational for a lower amount of water, I think that the state can make it. But not unless we start planning, we putting in infrastructure now, and we put in strategies. And again, conservation is just is the cheapest thing that you can do, and it's the most immediately effective thing that you can do. So when I look forward to the state, you read these things, particularly coming out of New York and the East. California is going to dry up and blow away. Los Angeles is going to be like a ghost town in the desert. I don't subscribe to that. I think we can do a lot better than that. Really, I honestly think people like Kevin and a lot of our water managers in the state are leading the way. And certainly there are people working at places like Fresno and Water Irrigation Center there that are leading the way in the agricultural sector.
Take that, New York. You wish we'd blow away.
Yeah.
Let's finish with one more slice of hope, and I think it represents what good science and great research universities are able to do to help become part of the solution here. And this is to do with this grand challenge that UCLA has taken on. Glenn, do you want to respond to that, or Madeline?
I'll just say that UCLA will be celebrating its 100th anniversary. And in the 5 years leading up to that, we're going to be having lots and lots of events and things like that. But what the chancellor wanted to do, Chancellor Gene Block, was he wanted to focus on us, get us working together on the campus, get us working with our off-campus partners, and take on some really big challenges, whether they're in the area of medicine, the area of engineering, the area of the arts. And you know what the first grand challenge was that UCLA announced? It was the sustainability of Los Angeles. That is the first thing, that was the most important thing that we saw, giving back to the region which has supported us for 100 years and making a statement with our centennial that we are going to work together with Los Angeles, with this region, and we're going to go for greater sustainability. And the goals of that are threefold. 100% reliance on local energy, whether that's DWP putting out in the Mojave in the right places, putting in solar arrays and wind and things like that, having rooftop solar arrays here in the city, doing that. Secondly, 100% local water. Rather than having to bring all the water down from Northern California, pump it over the Tehachapi's, relying on the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which has served us well. But rather than that, capturing that storm water, recycling that water, and then doing this with preservation of our native biodiversity, our 100% preservation of biodiversity. That's the first grand challenge that UCLA took on. I'm very, very proud of the university because this is the right thing to do for environment and sustainability. It's the right thing to do for the Los Angeles region. When I say Los Angeles, I mean the whole region, including Pasadena. That's our kickoff for our 100th anniversary. It's a gift I hope that we're going to be able to make to all of you here and in our region.
And of course, great things are happening at other great institutions of learning throughout Southern California, but two of our guests tonight happen to represent this particular great institution. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm thirsty. Kevin, what do you, bottled water?
No.
No bottled water. We're going to have to get rid of that.
Madeline?
No, we don't have bottled water at UCLA. It's the most expensive kind of water, and then you're left with the plastic afterwards. We have mugs.
All right, so before all of us head for the drinking fountain, would you please help me once again thank our superb guests, not just for their participation this evening, but for this work that you've heard about that they are doing every day on our behalf, on behalf of really humanity's behalf. Glenn MacDonald and Madeline Glickfeld of UCLA's Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and Kevin Wattier, the General Manager of the Long Beach Water Department. Thanks also to the wonderful staff, as always, here at the Southern California Public Radio's Crawford Family Forum, including my co-producer, Janice Wachi-Hurst, technical director Dave McKeever, Ashley Alvarado, Haley Waters, Valentina Rivera, and Rick Potts. They answer to that long, cool drink of water known as John Cone. We'll be back with another Next People Science tomorrow soon. In the meantime, I'll be listening to KPCC and join the new Southern California Public Radio iPad app and bringing the world planetary radio from the Planetary Society every week. Good night, everyone, and have a nice, cool drink of water.